And Pedigree are giving away 1,000 double movie passes to Cats and Dogs the Movie. Send in the barcode when you purchase any Whiskers or Pedigree product or enter online. And you could also win one of 2 family holidays to the Gold Coast with entry to Movie World and Wet and Wild Water World, plus $1,000 spending money. Win with Whiskers and Pedigree.
When I get paid, I want to pay my bills, go out to dinner and have a little fun. Yeah, and I want to save the money I don't need to spend. But if something unexpected comes up, I need to get my hands on the money to pay for it. And if I get any extra cash, I want it to go straight into my savings. Basically, I want this and I want that. And I've got them both with Thoroughbred One.
Find out about the first account in the world that thinks like two, only from the National Bank.
Looking at markets now, the New Zealand dollar shot up as the US dollar was hit by the attack in Washington and New York, but later in the day, New Zealand was sold off. The share market took a pounding after news of the hijacking spooked investors. The SE40 finishing down 92 points. The tourism and aviation sectors, perhaps unsurprisingly, took the biggest hits. Analysts say big spending Americans won't travel now, and that could impact on our tourism industry. Telecom reflected the wider market malaise, attracting little buyer interest. It was down 7%, ending the day at 435. Welcome back, everyone. Well, the world's financial markets have obviously been shaken by today's attack. Values plummeted on European and Asian stock markets while gold and oil prices surged upwards. Some economists fear a global recession may be triggered. We cross now live to Stephen Parker, our reporter who's on the trading floor at Deutsche Bank. As you can see, good evening, Stephen.
Yes, good evening, John. There's no doubt there's been an enormous economic reverberation felt all around the globe. Just to give you some idea of the significance of this is the longest period the US markets have ever been shut since the Depression in the 1930s, and tonight those markets are still shut. As the stunned survivors staggered from the dust and debris of the Twin Towers, this shock destruction of the financial nerve centre of America was felt around the globe. Just a kilometre away from the blast, the New York Stock Exchange and Nasdaq were immediately closed, sending all other share markets into a state of turmoil, starting on the other side of the Atlantic.
The reaction was pronounced, and despite calls for calm, it was fearsome. We saw a plunge in share prices. The benchmark index of Britain's largest 100 companies rapidly turned a 97-point gain into a 260-point loss.
The London Exchange was abandoned and operated from another building as many finance workers fled the city.
We've been speaking to them this morning, like normally, and the next minute we know there's people, you know, put the phones down, and because the planes have gone into the building. I mean, we know people in those buildings, so I just think it's terrible.
Across Europe and Asia, most stock markets reeled with an immediate loss of 5 to 10% in value. The US dollar also plunged, while gold and oil prices surged. In New Zealand, the stock exchange opened an hour later than usual and also slumped by 5%. Bad news, but better than early fears that the global financial system was about to collapse.
Some of the initial concerns about the international financial system appear not to have eventuated. There was major concern that some of the settlements processes might be very severely disrupted.
The US economy is already fragile and sliding into a recession. It's possible this terrorist attack could trigger a worldwide economic slump.
That is a risk for the world economy. All depends on how the consumer in the United States reacts. If the United States remains weaker for longer, that will affect Europe, Asia, and ultimately New Zealand.
All eyes will be on the American Federal Reserve to see how it protects the US economy. But back here, one early concern is that tourism is likely to suffer.
There will no doubt be tightening of security on travel and all sorts of things which may cause economic impacts. No doubt in the short term this will impact quite severely in areas like tourism and so on, that people may have second thoughts about flying. All those sorts of things will occur. But in basic terms, the system seems to come through this test a little bit better than we feared.
And with the greenback in a slide and all flights into the United States still on hold, and many of the world's leading finance houses obliterated by this blast, its economic consequences will be felt for a long time yet.
Stephen, just how serious has this been for world markets?
Well, you wouldn't want to overstate it, and you certainly wouldn't want to understate it. The immediate reaction was a very sharp one for the markets. Many lost 5% just like that. On a global scale, that's billions and billions of dollars in value lost instantly. There's been a certain amount of resilience, but the New Zealand stock market's a good example. Ended the day 5% down. And what's really concerning everyone now, and I guess this is where the analysis will come in, is just what impact that's going to have on the US economy. We've been hearing this talk about an imminent recession in the United States. Have we now got the trigger that is going to set off an American recession? And certainly that would have a global impact.
Stephen, from the people you've been talking to, what's the feeling about the areas that will hurt the most?
Well, I suppose there's a general question about overall production. If you're seeing the oil prices going up by a certain amount, that's going to have some impact. We're hearing reports in the United States, for example, there's some panic buying, concerns over the oil supply. The prices in California have jumped up by 20 cents a gallon. So that's one certain area, the general overall production. Aviation and tourism are two areas of real concern. British Airways lost 20% on their shares immediately today. If there's a general global loss of confidence in aviation and flying, tourism here will be hurt, and certainly it's something that is coming at a very bad time for Air New Zealand as it's trying to climb off its knees. If there is this downturn in tourism, loss of confidence in aviation, is going to hurt companies like Air New Zealand and overall our tourism industry.
Yes, we'll have more on Air New Zealand later, but in the meantime, Stephen Parker from Deutsche Bank in downtown Auckland. Thank you.
News of the New York disaster has prompted special newspaper editions in New Zealand today. The Otago Daily Times, normally a morning paper, rolled its presses early this afternoon to put out a paper featuring some of the pictures and stories from New York. 25,000 copies were distributed free around Otago. Well, in Parliament today, the attack on America was being compared to World War II. Political reporter Jen Nolan was in the House. Good evening, Jen.
Good evening, Carol. Well, the level of outrage and horror was evident in the members' speeches today. The unknown perpetrators were compared to Hitler, and the victims' fate was likened to the Holocaust.
A minute's silence before the House began its business, as politicians reflected on the horror of this morning's events. Acting Prime Minister Jim Anderton then led the special statements made by every party leader.
As the nation gathered around radios and televisions and tried to make sense of this, I believe that a shared determination has grown. A determination felt by all decent people that the perpetrators of this violence must be brought swiftly to justice.
Nationals Bill English spoke of a Holocaust of innocent civilian victims.
We also look to the strengths of the United States as they respond, their sense of justice and their sense of outrage. We applaud the message of President Bush that this free nation stands unbowed and that the perpetrators will be found and punished.
Finance Minister Michael Cullen spoke for Labour.
It is hard to understand how anybody can believe that their cause, whatever it may be, is advanced by such actions.
Richard Prebble was the only one who saw it as a chance to score political points.
I was at Eden Park, or more correctly, outside Eden Park, on the day when one Karl Marx Jones hijacked a Cessna plane and flower-bombed that park. The Air Force actually considered shooting down his plane.
Prebble pointed out with the sale of the Skyhawks, from December on, the Air Force wouldn't have that option. But the Greens had a warning.
Even when the perpetrators are identified, and they must be punished, we would urge restraint and insist that a rash and violent response will only increase the loss of life, especially of the innocent.
Winston Peters spoke of a world that is irrevocably changed.
Tomorrow's world will be, sadly, at the start of the 21st century, a very different place because of today's events.
And United Future's Peter Dunn echoed the feeling of meaning.
Where the somewhat superficial, surreal and horrific world of the blockbuster movie became a grim and tragic reality.
Jen, where's Helen Clark in all this?
Well, she's been briefed throughout the day by telephone from officials here in New Zealand. She's just landed in Rome. She landed within the last hour and will be briefed by New Zealand diplomats at the embassy there in Rome. She's actually considering coming home. The conference, which was to be the focal point of this trip, the Progressive Governance Conference, has been cancelled. That was to be held in Sweden.